So minor second, that's a fourth, that's a major third, that's a fifth. So in the last couple of years, I developed some pretty good relative pitch by doing some simple ear training exercises. Relative pitch is basically the ability to distinguish the difference in pitch between two notes just by listening to them. And it's a very useful skill to have in music, regardless of whether you're a songwriter, an instrumentalist, or a producer. So that was a fifth. That's a major six. That was a tritone. So in this video, I want to give some insight into why you'd want to be able to learn how to do this in the first place, and teach what the intervals sound like, and share some strategies that help me improve upon this skill. So why is ear training worth the effort? So I think for me, the number one thing is that it helps me a lot with the creative process, and that if I have a melody or a chord progression in my head, I can get that idea into Ableton very quickly without having to fumble around pressing random keys trying to make it sound right, which I think disrupts from the creative process. And that, I think, if nothing else, if you're into songwriting or production, then I think this is definitely a skill worth acquiring. The second thing is that it helps learn how to play songs without having to rely on tabs or sheet music. You can actually just learn to play pretty much anything by ear. So for me, this has been great because as a guitar player, it used to be that there were no tabs for a song, then I just wouldn't even try to learn how to play it. So nowadays I can learn how to play most things that are not too complicated by ear, and that's just been a great gift to have. It helps you learn how to improvise by ear. It helps you learn how to jam with other musicians without playing out of key and embarrassing yourself. And I think it helps develop your ear for arrangement and mixing too. So like you can tell when things are out of tune or something is just wrong in an arrangement, and you can just go fix it. So like, I think most people can tell when things are really out of tune, but like now having done this for a while, if something is even off by like 10 cents or something, I can tell what's wrong, and I can just go fix it. So like I said, I think anyone can learn how to do this, but it does take a commitment and some time and effort. And at least in the beginning, there could be some frustration. In my case, it took me about 10 minutes of training per day over a period of about maybe 3 or 4 months or so in order to get to a level of competence when I could ace the questions on this interval training app. And just to be clear, when I started doing these exercises, I was really, really bad at this. And that's even though I was playing instruments for several years at that point. And I'm definitely not someone who was born with any kind of natural inclination for music. So while the time I think it takes to develop this skill is probably different for every individual, I think for most people, you'll be surprised at how good you can get at this within a couple months, no matter how bad you are today. So what I'm using here is the interval ear training exercise tool on musictheory.net, and I'm going to put a link to this site in the description below. I like this tool mainly because it's highly configurable and it's completely free to use. So what it does is when you hit this button up here, so it plays a reference note first and then a second note that's a certain interval away from the reference, and then your job is to identify what that interval is. In Western music, there's 12 intervals here, and they can go either up or down in pitch, so that's a total of 24 possibilities. And I think when you're just starting off, that's just way too much, and it's really overwhelming. So my first big piece of advice is to start off easy. And if you go up to the settings up here on the site, you can choose, you can customize which intervals it uses, first of all. And so my recommendation is to just start using the seconds and the thirds. So we'll just uncheck all the rest of these. And then if you go to play mode here, it will allow you to pick either ascending intervals or descending intervals or both. So I would start off just doing ascending only. And so with those settings, Now we just have 4 options here: minor second, minor third, major third. So my second piece of advice is that a common way to learn to recognize intervals is to associate each interval with a reference song or a melody that you know well. And I'm going to put another link in the description below to a site that has a big list of good reference songs for every interval, both ascending and descending. And you can pick through that list and find the songs that you know best and which ones you identify with most. As I go through each of these, I'll tell you what I hear in my head that's associated with each interval, which may or may not help you. My third piece of advice is to just understand that this takes time. Like as you do this, you're essentially like rewiring your brain to be able to acquire this skill. And it's better to just do a little bit every day. Like even just 5 or 10 minutes a day. And a few of these exercises, I think you'll start to see progress, within a couple of weeks. It's important, like if you ever feel frustrated or if you start like guessing, like just out of frustration because you're not having fun or it's getting boring, like for fuck's sake, just stop and come back to it later. You're not going to pick up the skill in a day or anything by grinding away at it for hours at a time. It doesn't work that way. And so like really try to be deliberate and intentional as you do this, and try to listen carefully and think about your answers before you just mash buttons. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. All right, so let's do a few of these exercises with just these 4 intervals. Again, ascending only. So I've reset the score up here, and let's listen to the first one. All right, so when I first started doing these, even just at this level, I was not doing all that well. So just be prepared for not picking this up right away. It really does take some time. But I found like one day after doing this for a few days, I just like woke up and I could ace these pretty easily. So let's listen to this one more time. So that's it's a consonant interval. I guess I'll just say it, but that's a major third. And it's a kind of a consonant happy sounding interval. And what I associate with the major third whenever I hear that is like that piano song Heart and Soul. Like those first 2 notes are a major third. So, and that was another major third. All right, so this one, let's listen to that again. It's a little bit more dissonant than the last one, right? So this is a minor third. So, and what I associate with the minor third is, as someone who's a guitar player, is or Smoke on the Water or Iron Man. Those first 2 notes in that riff, and those riffs are minor third. All right, so that was a very dissonant sounding interval. Let's listen to it one more time. So, Jaws theme, right? And that's a minor second. So that's Jaws is what people usually typically associate that one with. Let's listen to that one more time, just to not speed through these too much, but that's, Smoke on the Water again. That's a minor third. And that's the same interval one more time. And there's your Jaws theme again. And that's what I was waiting for. So that's a major second. So there's a lot of different things for the major second, but honestly, like having played the major scale so many times, I just hear the first 2 notes of the major scale. So once you get to the point where you can do maybe like 50 of those and get maybe 90% of them right, then I think you're ready to add more intervals to this. And then I would just go, straight up the list here and add the fourth and the fifth, and maybe the tritone too. And so I'll just play each of these three intervals just to show what they sound like. But the perfect fourth is Here Comes the Bride. The perfect fifth is commonly associated with the Star Wars theme, and that's also what I hear. So the first two notes in the Star Wars theme are a perfect fifth. And the tritone is pretty distinctive because it's very dissonant, but the first part of the Simpsons theme, at least for the ascending tritone, that's what I hear. All right, so let's do a few more of these. So that is a fifth. I hope you heard the Star Wars theme there. There's Jaws again. That's the major scale, or the major second. And there's Star Wars again. And there's our tritone. See, that's the most dissonant interval of all the ones that'll be here, so it's usually pretty easy to recognize. And there's another tritone. And there's the fourth. So that's all the options there. So again, just go little by little, adding intervals as you get better and better at this. I found sometimes when I was starting to do this, for some reason, I got the fourth and the fifth confused with each other for some strange reason. I don't know why. But if things like that happen, I think that's completely normal. So yeah, I would do that for a while. And then once you get to the point where, again, you can do 50 of these with all these options available and get 90% of them right or so, then I think you're ready to just add all the rest of these intervals back. So the sixths and the seventh and the octave. And this is where it starts to get a bit more challenging. Again, we're still ascending only, but you've got a lot more options available. But I'll step through each one and try to let you know what I hear for each one. So the minor six is, again, it's another pretty dissonant interval, kind of like the tritone. And this is probably one of the least common ones in pop music, but the entertainer is used a lot for this. What I personally hear, and this is just because of the kind of music I like, but I hear A Forest by The Cure, which is so the first two notes are actually an octave, but that's a six, a fifth, and a sixth. So if you know that tune or you like The Cure, you might know it from that, but probably I'm kind of unique in that regard. The major six is, I hear the NBC theme. NBC. Yeah, so that's, it's a pretty distinctive melody. And the minor seven is another really unusual interval that you don't hear in music very often. But I hear from the best reference I heard for this is actually from the Ford commercials back in the 90s, where they said, "Have you driven a Ford lately?" So Ford is a minor seven. When someone told me about that reference, now that's what I hear all the time. And the major seven is the last one, which is, again, another pretty dissonant interval. So there's a song from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And that's always what I hear when I hear that. And then octave, I find I don't really need a reference for the octave. To me, it kind of just sounds like the same note, if that makes sense. But it's Somewhere Over the Rainbow from Wizard of Oz, I guess, is another thing that people use sometimes. All right, so let's do a few more because, I don't know, why not? That's an octave. That's another octave. That is Smoke on the Water again. That's the minor third. That's Have You Driven a Ford Lately? Minor seven. And that's a minor 6. That's a forest by the Cure again. And there's our tritone. And there's the first 2 notes of the major scale, the major 2nd. And there's our major 7. All right, so if you made it this far and you can, get 90% with all these options available, then I think you're ready to turn on not just ascending intervals, but also just turn the descending intervals on too by checking this option here. And there's a whole new set of reference tunes associated with descending intervals for each of these. I think if you've made it this far, you're probably good enough and determined enough to try to figure out what works for you for the descending intervals based on some of the references available online. So I'm not going to go through every option for that here. I will just say that some people say that the hard part is learning the ascending ones, and that once you have that down, then learning all the descending intervals based on that is kind of a walk in the park. At least in my case, that was not true. I almost felt like I was, even though I could ace all the ascending ones, just relearning all the descending ones in addition to that was a whole nother challenge. So I guess if that's your experience when you're doing this, know that you're not alone, because that was the case for me too. In particular, for me, noticing the difference between the descending major 6 and minor 7. For some reason, just those 2 intervals gave me a lot of trouble because I kept confusing them with each other. But, just keep at it. It takes, like I said, probably a few months of consistent training to really nail this down. And again, just be deliberate and give it your full attention while you're using this exercise. And when you hear that, if you don't immediately recognize it, it's okay to replay it over and over again and focus and think, and try to just give it your best shot after listening to it a few times about what that is. And don't just randomly guess. That's just a complete waste of time. You're not learning anything by doing that. So that's a tritone. So I hope this was helpful, and good luck with learning ear training.